somebody once told me, a very popular YouTuber that I think has like 1 million subscribers said, you know, you have to get a few poses. Like that's how you make sure that you look good in photos and things. Like you only have to have a few, but I've never gotten any of them, so I don't look good at all. I should have taken his advice. You know, I didn't want to admit again that I have dad brain, but it's only been, I don't know, a week or two since the last episode that we filmed, so I definitely haven't shaken the rust off. But
You don't say.
you don't say. We went in there and I was like, Grant, we're gonna shoot an intro. And then we open up into the room that is, let's see, intimate? That's a good word. That's no disrespect. It's just quite different than the last one that you guys saw me in, because that was like a grand gala conference. Speaking of last episode, spin you around here, Grant, for a second. If you know, you know. You probably don't know. You're like, what the heck's going on? That is Vitamin Shopp's corporate headquarters. We just so happen to be across the street, but we're not speaking to the Vitamin Shop. We're at SupplySide East. And we're gonna be doing a panel with somebody from Nutrition Business Journal, I think Erica, David Sandler, which maybe you guys have seen on the channel. And we're gonna be talking about mostly energy drinks, which everybody loves hearing me talk about, but in a more broad sense. So I'm gonna, again, shaken, whatever, I don't know, the rust off. Maybe I'll say something smart or two. Again, Grant loves to catch the things that I say that aren't that smart. So we will put those in the vlog too, but hopefully you guys enjoy, and then we'll kind of take you around for the rest of the day. Sorry, I'm like a hand stalker, and like I'm not used to holding a light, so I'm like, what do I do here? Like,
question is, what is the best source of caffeine to use in an energy product? And I guess my question to you all is, is it all just about positioning? So if you're trying to do a clean label, all natural, do you go coffee bean, just make it easy and get synthetic, it's cheaper maybe? Are there other types? So that's what I'm interested from hearing from you and you guys. What do you think about caffeine? What's the best way to go?
No, I think it's a good point there, because I think if you are going to add incremental costs, pennies here and there, I think you have to really understand, like, are you making that consumer care about that difference? And if you can do that, then you can obviously, charge a little bit more and make that make sense to them. But I think a lot of times what happens is, people put a formula together, oh, this is a great formula, they put it on the shelf, and then that's it. And they don't really think about the step past that of how are we actually making the consumer care about what that, I guess, innovation is. Because that's really where I think maybe the product differentiation starts to connect the dots into like the bigger brand story. But I think it's just a matter of like getting past just the idea of like trying to stuff sometimes products, because especially we're talking about energy drinks, beverages. Again, a lot of that comes down to you're moving water around, which is extremely expensive. And at that point, it really comes down to probably your distribution, retail strategy, and only you're going to get kind of a premium price point if you are a good, I guess, brand storyteller.
A question for all of you. Using Amazon and Walmart as the examples, when businesses are doing business with that, does that induce or cause a race to the bottom? So much price cutting that you actually cannibalize yourself, hurt yourself, because you want to be on that platform. And therefore you, in formulating the product, some people cut corners because they know that it's actually a loss, not really a gain. So how does that factor in when you're dealing with big players like, Walmarts, the Amazons, and so forth?
Obviously, the distinction between Amazon and Walmart is Amazon, if you're acting as a seller, you can pretty much put up anything. And at that point, you do have, I guess, the chance to provide a more premium product or a product that's, geared or targeted towards a certain consumer group or whatever that is. There's those opportunities there. Now, I think what you're trying to get to is just, if you want to be arguably one of the biggest brands and be distributed across the country, like what does that, what's that threshold, like from a formulation, margins, how do you make that work? And I think, traditionally, if we're talking energy beverages or energy drinks, like I mean, you arguably do not make money for the first 50 odd million dollars. Like that's the difficult thing. You usually have to raise capital like up until that point, which is like
100%
usually
correct.
you're really kind of, I guess, like, you know, trying to get that money to be paid from somebody else to allow for you to get the scale to eventually make that make sense. But at the beginning, if you're just starting from square one and you're trying to make money, if you aren't great at, again, brand storytelling, making that premium product make sense to the consumer, you're arguably not going to make any money. Like, it's the case.
Yeah.
That begets one other
100%
question. Has
correct.
this caused a rise for the amount of powdered stick pack energy
Yeah.
products, hydration products, because of what you're talking about?
Yeah, I think that's where you're starting to get some of that, like what is a beverage? Like at the end of the day, like I kind of mentioned there's a beverage identity crisis where it's like if it's ready to mix or if it's ready to drink or, you know, there's that powder to, I guess, beverage kind of playbook, both sides of it. And a lot of times that comes down to, if we're talking about, you know, I guess building a audience or getting people to be attached to your product or interest there, like you're trying to figure out any way possible, maybe the most cost-effective way. I think there's an interesting thing that's happened over the last, I don't know, at this point maybe 5 to 7 years, but really it was probably because of Bang Energy that did this, was you had brands that got incubated in the supplement space, like energy beverages, and they built a significant audience based on, you know, maybe it's pre-workouts or whatever that is, and they use that cachet to then eventually kind of fund their beverage thing, because you know, arguably there's a decent amount of margin if you're selling a ton of maybe pre-workouts or something like that. So you're using that as essentially, instead of raising capital from outside, you're basically taking profits and then putting that into a actual beverage. But you have a built-in audience. Like you tend to have, you know, as an example, like maybe Ghost Energy or something like that, they had $50 or $75 million worth of like energy pre-workouts or something like that, where eventually they're telling consumers, hey, go and buy our energy drink, and then that kind of speeds that process up a little bit quicker. But you know, you're trying to get around really the reality that you're not going to make much money by just selling, you know, water that has some caffeine in it.
What are the opportunities then for a non-RTD or non-beverage hydration or energy product? You know, is it a shot? Is it a drop like the Noon products? Is it a powder? Is it a stick pack? What's like the right way to go then?
I think when we're talking about the actual RTD beverage side, that's a kind of that own discussion. But I think at the end of the day, consumers are trying to solve for some problem. They're trying to get more energy in their day, which is, I think, at this point defined by stimulation. So at that point, you're looking at it as like, okay, if I'm a startup or whatever, how do we gain the interest of people trying to find stimulation? What is that delivery format? What is that thing that maybe is a little bit different? So that's why I think you're starting to see, you know, arguably, you know, innovation or invention in some senses where you're having, is it gums or, you know, different candy or confectionery type of things where there's caffeine or some maybe focus ingredients in there. You're having just multitude, I think, of those. But I think really then that gets into the idea of, okay, how are people utilizing that product within their day? Is it something where they're trying to replace that from existing ones that they're already consuming? Like, you know, this idea of swapping maybe coffee for energy drinks, or, you know, what are those use occasions or those I guess, time parts throughout the day that somebody would use that? Are they incremental or are they just replacing something? And then if you're replacing, then it's a matter of, I guess, describing yourself in a way that makes you feel or makes that consumer feel like it's worth them replacing something that's a lot easier to get or a lot easier to find, or maybe the price point's better or whatever that is. So there's a lot of those, I guess, things to kind of think about. But there are opportunities out there. I think there's a lot of that. And it's just a matter of like getting past the novelty of it and getting into how do we make it useful and actually that like innovation make sense to the consumer? Like how do they use that thing? But I was thinking to myself, like as we're talking, like Erica's presenting all this data, and it's like, you know, rosy and everything's great, and then, you know, me and David over here telling everybody like, fuck, it's hard, man. Like don't do screwed. And I think what this comes down to is like, there's this like this beverage mirage opportunity. Like at the end of the day, like people look at these big numbers. I think if it's myself or Erica, the person presents these things, they go, oh, I need to get there. But then they don't think about like how hard it is to get actual traction in these spaces, or how costly those things are. And I think, you know, maybe it's because, you know, Dave and I have been around the block a little bit, and we're like, we're trying to present both sides of this, because I'm I see too many. I get approached weekly by people that want to start, an energy beverage or something like that, and I have to give them that like hard truth and saying, the reality is like, yes, there's a huge amount of opportunity. People have done it, so like you shouldn't be discouraged to the point where you shouldn't try things, because if somebody's done it, you could probably do it. But at the end of the day, you have to understand the work and the actual path, and just like as David said, like it's spatial cost, it's logistical stuff, it's the operational or organizational structure that's required to be able to do those things. It's much different than a supplement company, like one that sells caps, powders, pills. Very different. And people need to be aware of those things, because I think I've seen a graveyard of people that thought they could do it and they didn't. So it's just one of these things where I think it's just, I guess the kind thing to do to show both sides of it. But I just was thinking about that as we were talking, because I'm like, man, like I know, like all people came in thinking like, yeah, we're gonna do this, and then all of a sudden, like, we're over here.
We're gonna get shirts, tube, and glue.
Let's switch a little bit now that we understand how hard it will be. What's the right way? Let's talk about formulation. So like we have caffeine. How much should you put in it? Does it depend on who you're selling it to? What else goes in a good energy product or beverage? B vitamins. What else?
If we're talking branded ingredients, I guess one of my biggest pain points that for the longest time has always been, and not that your strategy was wrong, because I think there's definitely the cutting the cost, leveraging one of the bigger brands to kind of help you tell that story. But I think what ends up happening more times than not is like the branded ingredient, the suppliers like have just given all of the brands, hey, you tell the story for us. Like, we're not going to really substantially spend the effort and the time and the money towards becoming our own consumer brands, because I think as arguably as things kind of go out over time, like as more transparency turns into traceability and we start to like break the walls down, ingredient suppliers, contract manufacturers, everything, they're going to start to be known more by consumers. And because of that, I think they need to start to treat themselves more like the consumer brands. They need to start to think about that end consumer, start to think about how do we tell our story better. Because arguably, you think about going back to maybe the beginning when this maybe was the strategy of play, was like there wasn't a lot of brand competition. Maybe like the brand had the opportunity to tell the story of the ingredients. They had the margin to be able to also tell their own story. Now I think the unit economics or whatever is so tight just for the brand in itself to cut through the noise against the 10,000 competitors. They don't have the time, the energy, the attention of the consumers to do that for another company a lot of times. So it puts those ingredient suppliers in a tough position. I think they need to start to go out in front and say, how do we make our ingredient meaningful? How do we get that, the consumer market to actually go, oh, cognizant, it's in there. Like that means that's a great product. That means any other product that doesn't have that in there, maybe that means that product is inferior or less, great or whatever that is. But it takes, I think, a shift in the model of how they're marketing or they're spending some of that. And just, I agree though. I think it's probably a twofold. You do need to have big brands to help you do that. And the bigger the brands, if it's something like Nutrabolt, we're talking about C4 or something, like they probably do have the ability to also help that process up. But I think it's, it just can't be what it used to be, I think.
What's hard about formulating with water?
Talking about David said about shots, like why hasn't, I guess, shots progressed maybe? And I think that comes down to that was like just a super functional, like you took a shot, whatever. And why that hasn't, I think, grown is that I think energy beverages as a whole has become to this like kind of, I don't want to call it like an indulgence, but like an enjoyable experience. Yeah. So like you want the product to taste really great. So then when you start to talk about things that are past, flavored, carbonated, caffeine waters, you start to then get into the flavor systems, and then it's a matter of, okay, how do we make these things taste, exceptional? Because I think at this point people have, or they're conditioned to a point where they want this thing to taste great, because even one of the biggest, I guess, areas or use occasions that have grown recently around energy beverages is people drinking those with meals, like at lunchtime or something like that. You're seeing them now being available in more like quick service restaurants and things like that. So if you are replacing your carbonated soft drink with arguably a carbonated soft drink with more caffeine in it, like you want it to taste like Diet Coke. You want it to taste like what you're expecting it, because you want to enjoy that meal experience. You want everything like that. So I think when you start to get into some of these more technical or more functional type of products, you then still have the same kind of level of conditioning of like what a consumer expects. They're not going to, accept what happened a decade ago or say, oh, that's great tasting for what it is. Like no longer will our consumers say like, oh, well, it tastes good for this. No, they want it to taste as good as what they're replacing on the market, which then presents its own cost issues and kind of difficulties.
I mean, let's talk about flavor a little bit. What is it? C4, crazy flavors in the gas station. Now, is that like what you have to do? Go crazy with your jelly bean flavors, or can you just have, I don't know, strawberry?
The idea of utilizing whatever it is, if it's ingredients or flavors or whatever that is, it has to make sense to this like overall bigger like strategic narrative or a story around things. So it doesn't necessarily need to be a licensed flavor or something like that. It could just be something that is nostalgic from maybe the founders. They can tell a story about why they did this or whatever. There has to be, I think, something there that kind of breaks you through the mold. Now we're talking about like challenger or emerging brands over the idea of like, a Red Bull doesn't need to talk about why they launched Dragonberry, this, that, or whatever. Like it doesn't matter. But I think if you are an upstart brand, choosing these things, there should be an intent behind what you're doing. And a lot of that comes down to, sometimes it's nostalgia, sometimes whatever it is, there's something that needs to be weaved into that bigger story. It has to be a chapter of that story. If not, it's just another maybe incremental cost. Like a lot of times people feel like they're just chasing these licensed deals because they have to. And that just adds incremental costs. And a lot of times it doesn't move the needle because it's really just another product element or feature that like if you don't bring it value, then it's just another incremental cost that doesn't like produce some margin benefit for you. But I think there are those, I guess, flavors that are we just accept as we can drink them every day. They're just kind of acceptable or whatever. But then when you move into these like kind of funkier, more specialized ingredients, and maybe why the licensing stuff has really been important is because of what kind of David said. Like if you were to say it's, gummy worms or whatever, some generic version of that, like you don't know, you're trying to figure out what is that? Like, is it going to be too sour? Is it going to be too this? Like what flavor notes are they going to bring in? Maybe you don't pull the trigger on that because you're like, I only have the budget to buy maybe one or two of these and I don't want to really, whatever. Where you have something that says, Sour Patch Kids, you have the idea, I know what Sour Patch Kids is going to taste like. So then you're more willing to pick up that one kind of funky one because the expectation is you already know that flavor, you know it inside and out. And then the hurdle rate to get into that product is a lot easier. So that's usually where the value kind of comes in there. After stage thoughts. I feel like a lot of times when we're doing this, I always think like, did it go well? Did it not go well? I ask Grant if it does well. He always, I don't know if he's just trying to be nice or if he's actually telling me the truth, but he'll be like, oh, it's great. And I'm like, okay, I get hyped up. And until we see the clips after or we see the post-show survey from like the speakers, then I get to know like if it really went well. It was a focused conversation on energy drinks or energy as a whole, the platform, which was great because I think the last couple of times that I've spoken, it's been so broad that like it's hard to get into like the depths of certain things or like what's actually like moving the needle or like some of the underlying drivers, which was, we were able to do that in this conversation. So that was good. Hopefully that energy from the panel will translate into my energy staying high for the trade show that we have to find. This is the first time I've been to SupplySide East. I don't know why my brain always goes to like hip hop music or rap music, but I'm thinking about when I was growing up and there was like this East Coast, West Coast like rivalry of like hip hop.
The East Coast don't love Dr. Dre and Snoop Dogg.
So I grew up in the Midwest, which is kind of weird to think about. The Midwest is actually closer to the East Coast than it is towards the West. And especially Ohio, which is the most eastern part of the Midwest. Sorry, I'm getting off track here. But I always loved like the East Coast, like Notorious B.I.G., kind of that side of it over the West Coast. Because like that vibe, that flavor just didn't like translate to like the Rust Belt of Ohio. But why I'm bringing all this up is that I was getting love from the West Coast for years, SupplySide West. Wonder if the East Coast is gonna love me like I love them. Am I gonna be just the Snoop Dogg, the Tupac, where I only get love from the West Coast? Or am I gonna be internationally known? Shout out Mr. Worldwide, Pitbull.
I'm Mr. Worldwide.
Freaking hate. I don't know if this is going to become a thing, but do people still like do things like hashtag airport thoughts? I don't know. Like,
Hey, Justin, what's up?
Not much, Jimmy. Hashtag chillin'. What's up with you?
but we are in another airport on a quick like 24-hour trip again because we're trying to rush as fast as possible to get home to my newborn. Grant's not trying to, but I am. And this is the time, I guess, to reflect, maybe, is at the airport, because we have an extra few moments before our plane leaves, which is a slightly delayed. But I'm trying to think of like the word I used right after the speaking engagement. I think I might have used, intimate, or like it was, smaller. None of those words were really to ultimately mean anything like negative. I think that it's just a wild contrast to the last episode you guys saw, because that big old like room. Secondly, compared to maybe the few videos you've seen at maybe like SupplySide West, which this was SupplySide East, there were distinct differences, and the size of the shows are noticeably different. That's not necessarily a bad thing. I would make another joke about the dog and the fight or whatever, but you guys have heard that enough. So what I'm trying to get to is like, there are benefits sometimes when they're small shows or at a smaller, I guess, like focused panel that I was on. Kind of start there first, because I think when I'm normally doing these educational panels, I feel like, and maybe this is the nature of me as a strategist that handles so many different things, they tend to put me on these ones that are like super wide breadth. Like I have to talk about 20 different things, and because of that, you only get to talk about a little bit of surface here, a little bit of surface there, and you don't really get to get into like the details or the like weeds of different things, where this one was energy and just that as a whole, which was great because I got to talk about just so many different elements of why that's maybe difficult, or maybe why it's exciting, or maybe why it's changing, and people maybe don't see those things that I kind of see all the time. The other thing about that panel was like it felt like an intimate conversation, like a fireside chat when we were up there. Like the people that were in the audience, they were just adding into the conversation. Like it wasn't where we were these quote unquote thought leaders or experts or whatever it was that there was a ton of equals in the audience, and that they were getting stuff from us, we were getting stuff from them. It felt like a really great like dynamic that was going on, which honestly is probably the only speaking engagement so far that I've ever done that has felt like that. So that, I think the size of the room, the intimacy of the room, I think worked in that favor to do that, which was great. Now, on the size of Expo or SupplySide East, you guys saw noticeably different. The booth sizes are smaller, all those types of things. I mean, again, maybe that is a stark difference and you're like, wow, this is whatever. But the benefit that I think I got out of this was that I had time to kind of talk to different people at the booths. Good, bad, ugly, whatever it is. Like I show up to like a SupplySide West, and I think there's a instant level of, you see I'm a consultant or a strategist. I don't formulate products. I'm not the science guy. So when I walk up to an ingredient trade show booth, they're very busy, and they kind of look at you and they're like, well, this guy's maybe not going to be our direct customer, and maybe they are quick to get you out, or they're whatever it is. And not that I take that negatively. I mean, I think that's just part of it. You're trying to prioritize where your attention needs to go when you're at those trade shows. But this one was different because there wasn't a lot of people walking around. There wasn't just a lot of noise. Just the overall noise. I think that the level of loudness or the level of volume was lower, so you can actually have conversations with people and actually talk to them for a good amount of time, which was good because I got to meet a handful of like ingredient suppliers and different supply side people that I really appreciate what they do in the market, but have never had a chance to actually talk to their team members for a amount of time that was what I like to get into the depths of conversation. So I think in that sense, it was an incredibly valuable show. Yeah. At the end of the day, I mean, I don't think it really matters if it's small, not this, that, whatever. I mean, I think that you obviously have to come to these shows, going back to something I said before, sometimes you have to consistently show up, and you never know going in, like, what you're going to get out of these shows. I think I probably had an expectation going in. Maybe it was going to be similar to SupplySide West, and then you show up and at first you're like, oh, and then all of a sudden I'm getting probably more value than I did at a big trade show like SupplySide West. So hopefully you guys enjoyed this one. It was, I want to say it's different, but it's not different. One of these times we're going to just like do something completely wild that you're going to be like, what the heck is going on? These are, obviously a lot of times you guys see me speaking on panels or at trade shows or, maybe at some of the business clients and things that I have that will enjoy the camera lens in front of their face. There's not a lot of them that do, which it's unfortunate because I wish I could take you guys along on more trips. But this, one of these times we're going to throw just a curveball at you guys and just do something totally wild. I don't know what that is. Grant's creative. He's going to think of some things maybe. If you guys have some ideas, maybe drop them down below in the comments. The next episode, we're not going to have you guys on another cliffhanger very long. I'm actually, we're going to be heading out to LA at another kind of conference. This one's a big boy conference.
Are you a big man? Huh? I'm talking to you.
What?
You wake up in the morning and say, I put on my big boy pants.
Stage with people like the CEO of Monster Energy and these kind of guys. And not that I'm on their level, I'm probably C squad, but hey, you got to start somewhere. I'm going to level up. Maybe one day I'll be on the A squad and you guys will be, put me on the top of like the Coachella headlines of like the big fonts. I'm probably way down there in like the low tents if you guys have ever been there. I don't know, I'm thinking about Coachella because it was this weekend, but rambling, dad brain, sorry guys. I'm gonna end this one here because I need to be a good YouTuber. Grant's giving me that like wink, like telling me, please tell them you need to hit the thumbs up. Please tell them you need to subscribe. Please tell them, I don't know what else you gotta do. Ding, bell, things, whatever, I don't know. Just appreciate you guys watching this one, spending a little bit of time with me, and see you guys on the next one.